Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, and perhaps even good evening at this point. We're very happy to have you for this third masterclass that is hosted by UNIDO, and we want to thank the Business Club Africa again for the space they're providing for us to have this discussion. So the topic of the session is about leveraging innovative finance for startups and SMEs. As one of the greatest challenges that micro and small businesses face, whether it's at the startup or growth phase, is in getting funding. So in conversation with our speaker for today, this is some of the challenges and opportunities that are available through the different financial solutions and how they can be leveraged to fund a business. So I will hand over the floor to Alpha Barry Bakar. Who is our UNIDO expert on access to finance, and we're very happy to have him. Alpha, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks to everyone for being on this masterclass. It's I'll call it a conversation because we share at least ideas, we share our experiences, but also we share our challenges. We as development agency, but the others are entrepreneurs. And we would like to hear from them in order to actually ameliorate what we're doing on the ground. My name is Alpha Bakar. As you mentioned, I'm a UNIDO specialist on access to finance, but also innovation. I work mainly on designing and implementing financial mechanisms in some of the countries where UNIDO is developing and implementing projects, specifically on rural entrepreneurship and agribusiness sectors. I'm a specialist also on innovation and how to identify technologies and techniques and adopt it in order to implement it in some of the countries, specifically on agro-processing, but also access to packagings and access to market also.
Thank you, Alpha. So let's just get right into the meat of the substance. What are some of the challenges that MSMEs and startups in the agricultural sector face in attracting finance?
I would say it's the nature of the activity, and many of the people that works in the finance knows finance is not a prêt-à-porter. It's mainly something which you customize with the need of the projects, and specifically SMEs working or entrepreneurs working in the agricultural sector face the first problem they are facing is the nature of the activities. The financial product available on the market, they are not medium terms and they are not longer term. They are always, and for most of the countries we are working, they are short terms product, which actually does not match with the needs of the entrepreneurs. That's the first challenge. Actually, the second challenge is from the banks themselves and the microfinance institution. Their approaches are mainly commercial approaches, and they do not have actually customer-based approach where they can design and implement and sell specific agricultural products. In the other hand, from the demand side, you have mainly the main players in the agricultural sector evolving, specifically in Africa, evolving in the traditional way. So driving them in a commercial interaction with a bank or a microfinance institution is quite a challenge also. On the other side, you have from the banks also lack of capacity of designing the right project for them and the right products, for them. And at the end of the day, you have also the traditional challenges you have in facing finance in Africa in general. The interest rate is a bit higher. The cycle of the loan is a bit coercive. In the other side, also you have a problem. The majority of people evolving in the agricultural sector are female, and having access to finance is also a double challenge, because you have the structural challenge, you have the economical challenge, but also you have the gender-based challenges that people are facing. So all those things put together slow down the productivity of some of the countries in Africa, slow down the competitivity of some of the crops in Western Africa, and also endanger people's revenue stream in the continent. So finance is at the heart of the agricultural activity, but having access to it is challenging in many ways.
Thank you. And I think we often hear about this this concept of the missing middle. I wonder if you could perhaps explain a little bit more about that as a concept, and perhaps how, you know, that this plays in with all the issues that you already mentioned.
Micro and nano credit are quite, covered in some of the countries, but the missing middles starting from $1,000 to $5,000 to $20,000 is quite challenging for many of the entrepreneurs. First, because of the availability of the funds from the main players, from the loan players, if we're talking about banks and microfinance. For the majority of them, they have some funds, but not enough funds for all the clients. So you have that problem. The other problem is the quality of the collateral they are demanding, because that also is another challenge for the entrepreneurs to have access to loan. So for the missing middle people, you have also that as a challenge, but also you don't have many players that cover that specific needs in terms of either loan or equity, even in terms of coverage. The nature in talking also about the nature of the activity, mainly people with that specific needs in the missing middle are at the frontier between the small producers and the medium producers, but also the processors. In the two sectors, there is a need of capacity in attracting those kind of financing, but also spending it in the right way in order to be able to repay the loan on time. And the other sector, you have also a lack of capacity in terms of choosing the right technology where to spend the money in. Very often people getting that money and the 10,000 and the 15,000 euros, spend it in technologies that actually are not adaptable or adapted into their needs. And they end up having technology and machineries that are not properly working in their field. So they end up with having broken technologies, but also a big amount of loan to repay back.
Just to hit on that point, because it fits very well with what you're saying, there's a high degree of interactivity between innovation and finance, and how those two interact with each other in the context of an SME or a startup who's trying to leverage both. Do you have an example of perhaps exactly what you're saying, a case of technology being incorrectly or not fitting the context, or perhaps the financial instrument not fitting the context of the business?
In many sectors in agriculture, let's talk about the processing, specifically processing the crop that are in need of being drying technology. People very often get electricity-based drying machineries where solar-based drying technology can fit and are much more or less expensive than the other one. When you get actually electricity-driven machineries where you don't have proper electricity available, so you either actually your production expenses are much more higher than another one. So you have different, choosing the right technology can actually save and easy the repayment of your loan. So that's a capacity we need to put together before getting the loan, but also energy efficiency is at the middle of the conversation when it comes to choosing the technology you want to utilize in the transformation and the processing of your crops.
Thank you. So as you were saying earlier, there are some very clear challenges in accessing finance in the agricultural sector for a number of different reasons. But what actors and what instruments exist in this space that are perhaps even considered conventional at this point because they have over a long period of time adapted to those circumstances?
Very often in some of the countries, traditional players in the financial sector got line of credits, specific line of credit. But we all know that when you have lots of line of credits with specific conditions, then you disturb the market of the finance, which is not actually what we want to do in intervening. So traditional banks, traditional microfinance institutions, and traditional lenders do not have access to a longer term refinancement in order to be able to give it to Savings are in short terms in Africa. So those ones do not have the loan pot, a bigger loan pot actually to give out to the borrowers. That's one specific problem that has to be addressed. The other one, in terms of existing players, is actually they perceive agriculture as a higher risk domain where they don't want to invest in. So every single explanation is right, or reason to not go into agriculture is welcomed into that sector. What is now, what people are witnessing and what is working and what we've seen in these regions, first of all, is mobile banking is getting into the habits of everyone, specifically in the rural sector and with agricultural players, and interaction with the device as itself, a smartphone or a dumb phone, it depends where you are, is getting considered as a credit record, as a history of management. So putting the transaction between the buyers and the crop sellers through a mobile phone can actually constitute a management or a credit history, or actually a cash flow history that you can show. If it's well structured and the capacity is there, you can show to a banker to be considered as a record. That's first thing. So actually technology is getting in, mobile technology is getting it, mobile funding is getting into it. So it's getting considered as a tool, a fundamental tool. You use a smartphone actually to get the trainings, the necessary trainings in some of the countries. You use the mobile phone to sell your crops. It's a very interesting tool to sell, but you use it also to do accountants, but also to as a bank. So that tool is in the center of all the efforts of bringing innovation within the agricultural sector. The second thing we've witnessed, and the second actually sector, or the second tool we've witnessed with serious advantage for agricultural players, is the crowdfunding. One of the projects UNIDO has been involved in, and UNIDO have witnessed a serious success on it, is we have tried to develop a platform based on evidence that it works between the diaspora people and local people in a specific region of a country called Mali, which is in West Africa, where the diaspora were ready to actually directly invest into agricultural projects. So diaspora's remittance is, when it is turned into investment money, it is a very serious alternative to traditional banking, where people can actually invest and help agricultural people to get serious investment, medium-term and long-term investments, so they can get into it. But also, as you know, crowdfunding is something where you actually can prepay some of the crops. So instead of cash remittance, it can be livestock remittance, it can be agricultural crops remittance, etc. People can buy online and people can feed their families from wherever they are in the diaspora sector. So that's also a promising path that has to be explored, and that has to be developed, and has to be put on there. So yeah, those two things, smart technology, well, mobile phone technology is key. We need to look at it on that way. We need to look at it in the way it is disturbing the market of finance, but it can also be a disturbing in the tool of helping agriculture sector to develop. In the missing middle area, where the need is different from the micro and the nano, people can get access to funding by opening up. Well, the countries first needs to pave the way on equity business and business angel things, the regulatory framework and the political framework, and the macroeconomics frameworks need to be there in order to encourage such investment. But also, on the other hand, the habit should be from the demand side and from the supply side, the habit and the culture of sharing businesses, sharing opportunities, but also sharing risk needs to be at the center of interaction, and people need to invest into it.
Thank you. Going back to one of the points that you mentioned earlier, where of course you have a number of conventional sources of finance, as well as the more innovative ones like crowdfunding. How is the journey of an entrepreneur different depending on the kind of finance they're wishing to access? And what have you learned about that from some of your interventions and some of the projects that you've seen on the ground?
Women groups have quite an extensive experience in having, fundings, either funding associations where you have loans and savings associations to refund the activities is quite a strong habit in Africa. And, women groups within the agriculture, although it's still a weak system, they're still facing challenges, lots of different challenges based on the gender and also based on the perception of risk on that specific path. There is a promising, path to be explored on that way. In the other side, also in our experiences in Africa and in the region of the world, people tends to see a loan in some cultures as a threat to their business. So yeah, strengthening the capacities of getting the loans and using it wisely and using it in the productive way is something to be developed in those regions. But also now agriculture is being sexy and lots of young people are getting into it, and you have a lot of success stories that have been built in Africa where people getting into agro, people going back in the rural sector and doing great stuff out of it. So that also is getting to a point where people are bringing the urban entrepreneurship or urban knowledges into the rural area. So I'm seeing in the future, and now I'm dreaming loudly, I'm seeing in the future young people coming into the rural area with their knowledges in terms of management, business development, and sharing it, and their farms or the production centers being actually considered as schools, farm schools, where people can come and learn how to do basics in terms of management and provision and plans, etc. Get financial literacy, but also get other knowledges about agriculture and production.
Perfect. I'm just going to give a quick shout to the audience because we are halfway through the session. So we'll continue this conversation, but if there are any reflections that you'd like to share, whether live or in the chat, you're more than welcome to do so. The same goes for questions. I think this is very much as Alpha had said earlier, a knowledge sharing and a conversation between the various participants. So, feel free to raise your hand or to type in the chat, and we'll watch out for that. In the meantime, maybe I'll just throw an additional question your way. What are some examples that you've seen that have worked particularly well? For example, if we take the example of an incubator and in that accompanying the journey towards access to finance, what are some lessons that you've learned there that could be shared and could be replicated elsewhere?
I think one of the reasons why incubators exist, and specifically in the agricultural sector, and the main role they can play, which I have witnessed working very well, is to bring innovations within the agricultural sector and try to adapt it before actually implementing it with lots of people. It will help the agricultural players to gain in terms of time, but also in some of the case and many of the case to get to save some money, but also to leapfrog and to get into lots of different things. I'm thinking seriously on vertical agriculture. I'm thinking of farming bags. I've seen in a very not very remote area of Kenya, a very interesting place where people actually experiment lots of different ideas and techniques and technologies on horticulture, but I cannot talk about success stories in Africa without talking about, Songhai Center, where where you have this huge center, which is actually more a school, more an inspirational place than anything else, where people come and learn how to see agriculture as a very productive area, but also how to see agriculture as a technology-driven area where people can experiment that. That's one thing. So incubators can play that role of sharing knowledges, but also implementing knowledges within the main player. The agropreneurs can actually learn a lot from incubators. It is also a place where people experiment, validate, and publicize working experiences, either in terms of production, in terms of commercial techniques, but also in terms of access to finance and capacity building also. So major role the incubators can play into agricultural development in Africa.
Thank you. We have a question from Rui Levy from the chat. How do you ensure the safety of new instruments like crowdfunding when there is perhaps not a national legal framework in place? From the perspective of
specifically on crowdfunding, you still have that problem in Africa where you have no regulatory framework in many of the countries. So what we've experienced and what we witnessed in Mali, for instance, where there is no regulatory framework on crowdfunding. So we work on experimented crowdfunding platform, which was a French-based one existing over 15 to 20 years to raise the money outside, because they have the instrument, they have the experience, and they also have the regulatory framework. They are based in somewhere where the Malian diaspora is very active, and build a bridge with an existing microfinance institution in Mali. So the bridge between that crowdfunding institution and the microfinance institution, which is regularly registered with the Central Bank of Mali, actually is an example of going with a no regulatory framework to build an existing working legal instrument. And the microfinance institution in Mali were giving out the loan, regularly, normally. So the microfinance have access to refinancement instrument, which is the crowdfunding instrument, and taping on the Malian diaspora's money, but also being able to have a very large surface of financement for these. So I think that's one thing. The other thing will be to see what is existing in many projects in Africa where there is no regulatory framework. Lots of people are calling upon the crowdfunding tool. But let's not forget, crowdfunding is an African instrument existing for centuries. We call it in different way, but social financing in Africa is existing. It's part of our DNA and it's part of our culture. So even in informal way, which we can consider as existing actually mechanism also, even if they are not registered, we consider it as instrument, and they are operational at this particular moment. Final say, I just want to make a little bit of comment on that. The first financial tool for an entrepreneur, either in the agricultural sector or in other sectors, is the customer. Let's not forget that. So in the agricultural sector, we say, do not produce and sell, but sell first and then produce. So, which is actually a strategy.
Absolutely. Nadia is asking, many farmers, especially smallholder farmers, as you said, are still frightened or not comfortable with financial products and services. Indeed, there are quite some initiatives ongoing, but the leapfrog and increased penetration rate of innovative financial solutions in rural areas across West Africa have not yet happened. How do you think we could effectively and efficiently go about and change these mentalities?
Once again, the problem with every single relation between a borrower and a lender is in terms of trust, and technology is coming into that. So people, and the majority of the players within the agricultural sector are old-fashioned people, but also traditional people. Actually, they're not comfortable or they're not equipped well, even in their minds, to go through that kind of financial sector. So maybe the first innovation will be to find a way of, ameliorating the outreach of those technologies, and see how people can adopt it. Adoption meaning buying into, and see how we can develop that. So social communication, social relationship, and social animation of those technologies is a dimension to take in account when you are actually selling those kind of products. That's one thing. The second thing is actually when people get, I used to say in Africa, when somebody trusts a technology enough, especially when an African farmer trusts enough a technology to put his money into it, everything can happen from that. So it is an intuitive process. It is a slow process in some cases, but it's very difficult to observe and to learn from observation at this particular moment. But we all know that 10 years back, the penetration rate of smartphone were on doubts. And now it is an evidence that it will be the tool for the next 10 years. So let's not forget that. And even technology itself is in Africa, and specifically smart technology or mobile technology, is disruptive enough to be adopted very fast. So, let's give a bit of time on that, and, the product itself will find its way of to spread across the agricultural people.
I'm curious about what you said earlier about crowdfunding actually being a very old concept, and I think that applies for a lot of peer-to-peer lending. Are there similarly, perhaps almost we might even qualify them as informal ways of accessing finance that have actually, with the advent of mobiles and digitalization, become more prominent and have actually been able to scale up?
Well, what we are currently working in Guinea-Bissau, for instance, on the mango value chain, and we came across a platform where people can actually, with their phones and the existing mobile banking account, irrespectively from each telco company or other, can access to a loan, a nano or a micro loan, to help them, collect, stock, and even sell the mangoes. We are going to implement that in Guinea-Bissau and with the farmers. And the first thing everyone is actually pledging for is to have a cultural way of selling that product, not a commercial way, not selling it as a mobile, a new technology to be sold in, but that's how we succeeded in Northern Mali. In Northern Mali, we built on existing saving and loan associations. So existing one, we equip them with the telephone and with the application to replace just the register book. So instead of using the register book, they're using the telephone. So cultural selling, cultural animation on a technology is a key to make it adaptable and to make it also to spread it within communities.
Thanks. I have a question from Abdoulaye Diallo. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. We see people from the diaspora going back to start agribusinesses, but most of those around me are not specialists in the field. Are there platforms or any kind of organization to accompany locals or diaspora in their agribusiness journey?
I think in some of the countries, in many of the countries, you can find that. You can find incubators, you can find you name it, tech labs, agro labs, where you can find those kind of informations. But the most important thing is actually when you want to have that kind of venture, when you're coming from the diaspora, the first thing to do is to maybe I would advise that. I mean, I've seen a lot of people doing that. Is to collaborate or to partner with local, players. You can find any local in any crop or in any agricultural venture in these countries in Western Eastern Africa. You can find a business partner who actually has the experience of the field, but also the knowledge on how to grow a crop. So partnering, sharing risk and sharing investments, and etc., is a key, to leapfrog and to join working projects. But in the other hand, there are not many, but in some countries you can find incubators and accelerators and tech labs and tech hubs where or agro hubs where you can actually find informations. But you also have the government. People very often are reluctant to go through the government, but you have the government with the private sector investment agencies, which very often gather information on agricultural investment. So you can have access to that. Also, it's available informations. And if I may also suggest to people to go through IFAD, the World Bank websites, and lots of things. You can find lots of informations, and the Research Institute also, where you have results. And last but not least, maybe, is when you get in a country in West Africa, go through universities. The academia actually got a lot of information on opportunities, but also on some on this, the state of the art on some of the issues in agriculture.
I have a question again from Nadia about perhaps some alternative financial solutions, such as pay-as-you-go for mechanization equipment or for food production and processing. Do you think that those kinds of approaches can be scaled up, and perhaps leveraging on the experience of the energy field or rural electrification?
They have lots of potential, and they need also to have a political buy-in, because at the end of the day, lots of initiatives like that need to have political buy-in to be replicable or upscalable very easily. That's one thing, because clusters where people have access to machineries, but also, have access to some of the equipment they cannot actually buy upfront, or they can rent or lease to buy, needs to have also, in terms of investment, a profile-driven investment. You cannot actually put a tractor in a desert and expect people to rent it. But if you put a drip irrigation system in somewhere where you have people have difficulties to have access to irrigation, then yeah, you can have those kind of things. Yes, that works. That have a potential. It is replicable. It is upscalable, but it needs to have a political buying, but also the business model needs to be well taught in order to have a very sustainable mechanism where it can last for a longer period.
Perfect. Just going back to perhaps something about the last mile, really, in terms of some of these services and mechanisms. Abdoulaye is asking, how do you empower villages with low machinery resources and routes? Because those places can be difficult to access and locals are not able to export or distribute their product. What kinds of insights could you share for those kinds of cases?
And entrepreneurs like Abdoulaye, which have access to internet, can actually play a major role on that kind of things. I mean, internet or digital platforms are now important to do and to sell any crops or anything you want to do. But basic infrastructure is important, is a key for agricultural development, and I hope governments, well, I know they know it, and people are putting pressure on them to build roads, but also to build water adduction, but also electricity and so on and so forth. Some villages which do not have that, you have the government willing to do it, but also you have very often people from the diaspora, but also people living in the cities, but that are from those villages, are well organized enough to be able in the capacity of realizing some of those things. Community-based social and economic infrastructure are very welcome, and the examples are everywhere. But also technology, I would strongly advise to see technology as an ally to go by those limits and those challenges, and in order to help agricultural players to sell their crops, but also to attract investors in the area.
And actually, on that note, I would encourage you to also go back and look at our previous masterclass on technologies and their use in enhancing agriculture. So I think some of these same topics are also covered in that. So by all means, go back and look at that too. I guess because we're almost running out of time, and I'll wait for more questions as they come in, but a question from my side is perhaps what are some do's and don'ts for entrepreneurs looking to access finance? What are certain milestones that they should hit or think about hitting before they perhaps look at certain instruments?
First, in the agribusiness sector or in the agricultural sector, or many businesses, you sell before you produce. Specifically, I said that. And I said also having access to finance is important, but it's not also a stress for the entrepreneur. People need to understand successful entrepreneurs within the region, specifically in a rural area. The more you have successful entrepreneurs, the more you have citizens in those regions. So municipalities needs to play a big role into this. Governments needs to play a big role into this. Basic infrastructure well seen as a key or as enabler. Enabling environment is important to develop all those things. Do not get into agro, or do not get into any agricultural project because it is sexy or because you want to do exactly the project that you've seen your fellow doing. Everyone has his own story. Write your own and get your own path to your own entrepreneur's journey. Get your homework done. Know a bit more about what you're going to grow or what into business are you going to identify the challenges, but also identify the opportunities you can make. Maybe your agricultural venture is not in the production side, maybe it's somewhere in the supply chain, somewhere in the value chain, where you can actually play a major role and invest. Think a bit more about transforming, because lots of people are doing the production. Transformation is the missing part of where we need more specifically young people and educated people to get in order to process the crops locally and sell it maybe in the cities or somewhere else abroad, or export it. Standardization, certification structures are important also. So think of it as part of what you are doing, but think of also sustainability in your entrepreneurial journey in the agricultural sector. Lots of people are making at this moment lots of money in the bio agriculture. So so this is a niche where people can invest in. In terms of money, access to finance, do not get a loan if you don't have the project. People easily tend to have the loan first before starting their project. Get your project properly designed, get your business properly designed, know your business before getting into any loan process, because at the end of the day, it's your business to paying back your loan, or you will end up paying it yourself, which is an unproductive way of getting into it.
I mean, right on time. I think that was a perfect conclusion to some of the key issues that we talked about. I would encourage everyone who has been listening in to maybe continue engaging on this topic on the session page of the conference. And thank you so much, Alpha, for really sharing your insights and your knowledge on this topic.
Thank you, Beatrice, and thank everyone for being here, and bye-bye. Cheers.